Is voting for a politician who pushes an agenda contrary to the teachings of the church mean that I am in cooperation with his or her manifold evils? So this is actually a very interesting question because it deals with this idea of what is our moral responsibility with someone else's sin. So I thought to answer this question, it would be useful first to go through St. Alphonsus Liguori's principle of cooperation to kind of give us a framework by which we might answer this question. So first, St. Alphonsus Liguori made this sort of question, sort of flowchart, if you will, to ask or to answer the question, and can I cooperate with what someone else is doing if what they are doing is evil? So the first distinction that he made was the difference between formal and material cooperation. If a person agrees with the evil that a person is doing, it doesn't really matter how much they help that person act, it is morally wrong. So an example of this, let's say that your friend wants to steal something from a house. If you say, yeah, go for it, I don't like that person anyways, and then go and buy the ladder for him, for example. Your actions are formally cooperating with what he is doing. You are acting in a way that helps him and you want it to take place. Well, then you have moral culpability there. You would have, in this situation, you would have mortal sin taking place because you're wanting a great evil to be done. Now, let's assume that you don't actually support whatever evil is taking place, and that there's some other thing that's going on that you are wanting to support, and this is an unfortunate consequence of it. We now get into this idea of material cooperation. Material cooperation means that you don't actually agree with it, but that you're supporting the action in some way, shape, or form for another motive. And here we now have to ask ourselves another question. Well, is your action, is your behavior going to directly lead to the evil action, or is it not going to? An example of this might be, let's say that you don't agree with this person stealing from this other person's house, but you don't want them to get hurt. And so you go along with them and you hold the ladder for them as they climb up and break into the house. Well, you might not want that to take place, but your action, the support and the holding of the ladder, of allowing him to get into the house, is directly leading to the evil. And so that action cannot morally be done. If your involvement is directly related to the evil action, then it cannot be done. But let's say that your action isn't directly required. It isn't directly in part of the evil action. We now get into this idea of remote versus proximate material cooperation. In the idea of remote and proximate cooperation, we're asking ourselves, how far away are you from the actual evil action? So let's say that you are the person who buys the ladder. You recognize that something might be taking place, but you buy a ladder because you need one at the house, and you think that maybe this ladder might be used to break into someone's house, but maybe not. Well, in that case, you're still very close to the action. Perhaps you're not directly involved. Perhaps your actions aren't going to lead directly to it, but you are supplying the means by which this takes place. Well, that wouldn't be morally permissible. However, let's say that you're the ladder manufacturer. You make the ladders. Your action, though it does lead eventually to someone breaking into someone's house, is so far removed from it that it would be morally permissible for a person to make ladders knowing that they might possibly be used to break into someone's house. Okay, I use that as a sort of a silly example so that way you can see everything going on. If you're formally cooperating, if you agree with what's going on, not morally permissible. If you are directly involved in the action, not morally permissible. If your actions are very close to the evil action, not morally permissible. It's only if it is remote, far distant from the evil, that an action of cooperation with moral evil could possibly be done. And I do want to say possibly. The principle of cooperation does not tell you what is morally good, it tells you what is morally permissible. It doesn't say what is morally excellent, what is following Christ. It only says what you could possibly be allowed to do depending on the circumstance. Now, let's apply this to this idea of voting for a politician who is pushing an agenda contrary to the church. Now, let's use the example of abortion because that's the big ticket conversation. That's the most important thing going on right now. So in the act of abortion, you have the direct killing of an innocent child. That is the evil act. However, the politician then supports this evil act. They are in formal cooperation with this evil because they were wishing this thing to be done, and their agenda is going to continue this to promote it. So they themselves are participating in evil. That action is not morally permissible. However, your action then is somewhat away from this. Your vote puts them into authority, puts them into a position of power. So if you are doing this knowing what is going on, if you're doing this willing that this vote to take place, you might be getting into the realm of mortal sin. It does seem as though in this situation there is a question of how proximate, how remote your action is, and how much you subjectively believe your vote to be putting this person into a position of authority and position of power that can continue their action, that continue their agenda. So here's where I would make somewhat of a distinction. If you believe that your vote, you personally believe that your vote will bring this politician into a position of authority, bring it into a position of power, that your vote matters, and you choose to vote contrary to what the church teaches, in that case, I would consider it to be morally illicit and it would be mortal sin. However, if you don't necessarily think that your vote actually is an important thing, it's not actually leading directly to this politician being brought into office, then we would enter into the idea of a remote involvement in mortal sin, in cooperation. And so in that case, it would kind of depend. Again, it doesn't mean that it's morally good. It's the question of whether it's morally permissible. So, long answer to a short question. It kind of depends on, do you want this evil thing to be done? Do you want this agenda to be pushed? Because if you do, then we can stop the whole analysis. It is wrong, cannot be done. Is your action leading directly to this? Is your action constitutive of this act, or is this action very far removed from the actual evil action? So I will put that to the subjective conscience of the person who's listening to this. Does that actually enter into the realm of proximate material cooperation?